Բարեկամներ, վերջերս Միացյալ Ազգերի կազմակերպությունում տեղի ունեցավ ցեղասպանությունների կանխարգելմանը նվիրված կոնֆերանս։ Այժմ ուզում եմ ձեզ ներկայացնել մեր պատրաստած ակնարկը այդ մասին։
It has been several years since the Armenian American Society for Studies on Stress and Genocide held a symposium on preventing genocide at the United Nations under the leadership of Dr. Ani Karapetyan. This year, the symposium was entitled Nations Acknowledging Their Dark History, Psychosocial, Economic, and Cultural Perspectives. The conference began with remarks by Armenian Permanent Representative to the UN, Garen Nazarian.
The genocide of Armenians perpetrated in the Ottoman Empire from 1915-1923 has been recognized and condemned by numerous countries, parliaments, international organizations, and genocide scholars community. We are grateful to those who in many countries of the world, including the Turkish scholars and citizens, simply citizens, realize that the significance of preventing crime against humanity and stay by our side in the struggle of prevention and recognition. Armenia unequivocally welcomed the clear position adopted by the international community, the member states of the United Nations, in precluding any possibility of immunity to pardon for perpetrators of genocide or other crimes against humanity. Without recognition and condemnation, it will be impossible to develop and implement effective mechanisms of prevention, which is one of the UN's priorities.
A recognition certificate and monetary reward was presented to the winners of the Genocide Essay Contest, given annually to high school and college students. Among the speakers was award-winning director, producer, and activist Carla Karapetyan. She is a narrator of a film called The River Ran Red, a documentary film directed by Michael Hagopian, which was screened at the gathering. The film presents some interviews from a rare collection of 400 Armenian genocide survivors, part of which was used for Steven Spielberg's Shoah Foundation Visual History Archive, which holds 52,000 Holocaust survivor interviews. The next speaker was Professor Aaron Staub, also a founding director of the doctoral program in the psychology of peace and violence at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. He has studied the roots of altruism, the origins of genocide, violent conflict, and terrorism, and then their prevention, psychological recovery, and reconciliation. Among the speakers was also Armenian American historian Professor Denis Papazian. During Professor Papazian's presentation, representatives of the Turkish government expressed their discontent, accusing members of the conference in distorting the historical facts. The confrontation was kept short since the conference attendees did not engage in an argument. Hence, the Turkish representatives left the room.
During your presentation, you said two things that caught my attention, and I would like to elaborate on it. First, you said that in order for us to achieve recognition of Armenian genocide in Turkey, we need to understand Turkey.
Absolutely.
And subsequently, you said that there's silver lining in this argument because Turkey is changing.
Right.
Could you elaborate on those 2 points for me?
Yes, inevitably, I remember the story of Gulbenkian, Kalus Gulbenkian. He was a very wealthy man, and he knew how to make deals. And before he made a deal, he would bring people to one of his palaces. He'd spend 3 days and not talk about business. And then after he knew them psychologically, he brought up business. And the same thing has to be true of the Turks. We have to understand them psychologically. We have to understand their history better than they do because they're denied the real story of their history. And so I've spent the last 15 years trying to learn Turkish history in a true and accurate way. And I want to prove to some of these people that they are not understanding their own history and therefore coming to wrong conclusions. For example, I tried to point out today that the Committee of Union and Progress controlled the government, and it was a dictatorship, and that these people were put on trial. And Ataturk himself said it was a shameful act what they did. Now, of course, the trials fell apart because the European powers were pushing for territorial advancement, and the Turks said, well, if everyone's going to be punished, why punish our individuals? But that was a mistake on the part of Turkey. They should have punished individuals and said, look, we're not guilty. These people misled us. And I think we have to find ways to explain to Turkey their own history.
how is it changing now? You, for instance, you spoke about the political climate that triggered the genocide.
Right.
What type of political climate do you think it has to be now for it to recognize it? What must occur politically within Turkey for it to be open to recognition?
Right. The first thing is that the Turks do want to join the European Union. At least they did very much so. In fact, they changed a lot of their laws to become in compliance with the European standards. They're a little bit disgusted now because the Europeans are pushing them away. Nevertheless, many of these reforms have taken place. Furthermore, they are returning slowly, a couple of Armenian churches. They're returning a couple of buildings. But we have to realize that there's a tension in Turkey between the conservatives and the reformers. And the conservatives are still in the majority. So the reformers can only move so quickly. And hopefully, by enlightening the Turks, by having conferences there, that slowly we can change things. There is no alternative.
Let's think out of the box. Let's think, what kind of value and price can we put on restitution? We always talk about recognition first, then let's talk about restitution. And we have to think about recognition because the two things go together. But what is the shape, the detail of restitution? Yes, we have to talk about the land, absolutely. I'm not trying to say that's not important, but what about all the other things? What about the price of the assets that were confiscated, the properties that were confiscated, the homes and the churches, even the bank assets in and of itself we're just beginning to, it's the tip of an iceberg where we are now in the court cases there, suing the U.S. Federal Reserve Board for allegedly being in possession of stolen assets. I think all of these issues are important to talk about because we stretch the parameters of debate and we put pressure on the leadership of those people in our community we have to think out of the box, because when the moment comes where restitution becomes number one in the political process, where are the ideas going to be? We have to start thinking now about the value of what it is, the price of what it is we want at the very minimum. We have to think about, if we want reparations, what the shape of that will be. And let's start that dialogue now and let it be part of the democratic process. And in that way, we put the ideas into the political sphere and we start to shake things up.
In other words, we would like a Turkish public to be given their democratic right to look at their past and know the truth. But don't you think that if we begin raising such important subjects as land, which in certain way will be translated as attack on their sovereignty, don't you think we're going to lose that public support that we very much need in order to convince Turkish government to recognize us, step one?
I think some people would argue that. I actually think that we should not put any preconditions on this discussion, because we can't dictate to those people living in Turkey what the democratic process should be. In the same way, you can't dictate to Americans how this discussion should go. And I certainly don't appreciate having my free speech constrained by somebody who's saying, you're defaming me by even talking about this subject, which is what happened here today. Actually, the question that the Turkish representatives wanted to ask was, how dare you defame our country by raising these issues? What do you think you're doing? That was, I think, the question that they were trying to ask. I was getting little snippets of it. And that it's difficult to have a civil discussion about this when you have the complete sort of cognitive dissonance, the lockdown of thought, which is a Turkish diplomatic representative telling me as an American citizen what I can and can't say about this issue. Is like they're trying to impose their value system in Turkey, their Article 301 mentality on me. I'm an American citizen. I'm also a British citizen, and I don't appreciate having my words censored in the United Nations.
And I am someone who's been following your work for quite some time, and I see all the important work that you're doing, both in bringing awareness and also promoting forgiveness and promoting reconciliation. How do you think these two forces that are so opposing, just now we saw members of opposite opinion of Turkish government vigorously opposing the messages that are being heard here. As you mentioned, the pain is there, the hurt is there, it's unsolved. How do you see these two opposing powers coming together to produce a concrete result of forgiving, reconciliation, and solution?
Well, thank you so much for coming. First of all, Haig, I really appreciate it. And it is a very challenging question what you're asking, because if the opposition is stronger and more resourceful and connected politically, and then it will be like a stumbling block, like a break, stopping the process of healing and peacemaking. And that's why I was vehemently against giving them any a moment of our conference, because we have procedures and they have to follow procedures. The fact that they came out like that vehemently and kept on talking, it seems like they're very traumatized themselves. Who in the right mind would do that? Or else they would write down what they wanted to say and ask a question at the end. Like any UN meetings, they can't do that in other meetings either. They're thinking just because we are not government, NGOs, non-governmental organization, that they have a right to bully us. And that's why I was a little aggressive, but I had to stop that process and respect the audience so that one perspective or revisionist perspective would not dominate. Like we have learned from our mistakes from the past, and that's the reason I was very vehement that everyone has to have follow the process. Now, our hope is that the numbers, like we were 100 people here and there were 2 that use that kind of approach. And I'm hoping as we grow and heal and come together in empathy and love and care, that becomes less and less powerful. And the mass of loving kindness and forgiveness will dominate. Not in a negative word, dominate, will be spreading around so that we don't have people being killed in Congo now or Sudan or Darfur. And it is happening now. And that's why I called on to people to really show how they can put their words into action. The action of doing something about what is going on now in other parts of the world. We keep, as Armenians, we keep crying over the same thing. But maybe 5% ever of Armenians really go out to African country to see what's going on there and how you can connect with them, because the same atrocities that I've heard from my ancestors and also through our research while we were studying the impact of genocide, we found the same things that is happening in Sierra Leone, in Congo, the same methods of chopping pregnant bellies and nipples, and the same methods. So it's like 100 years have passed, we're not evolving. So I'm so glad of this communication opening up through the website so we can inform the masses, but still the action is lagging behind.
For several years now, April is named the Prevention of Genocide Month. Many political and social events take place during this time. Events not only dedicated to Armenian genocide, but to genocides throughout the world. Crimes against humanity, which are waiting for justice to be served, since the denial is the cause of more of these atrocities.